Hey guys, what's up? My name is Zach, and today we're going to be doing a 2020 election prediction between Joe Biden and Brett Kavanaugh. So most of you probably know who Brett Kavanaugh is. He is Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court. He's been described as one of the most conservative justices to ever be nominated by a president, and he's been under scrutiny, heavy scrutiny recently, for sex scandals, including attempted rape, and today we're going to be seeing how he would do in a presidential election against Joe Biden, the former vice president of the United States. So I think it goes without saying that Brett Kavanaugh would do fairly miserably in this prediction, and this is mostly because he is very, very conservative. His politics would most likely turn off a number of independents and moderate Republicans as well, and he would lose out on a number of Trump Republicans because he obviously isn't a very Trump Republican himself, despite being nominated by Trump. And obviously, his sex scandals would be a huge obstacle for him to overcome as well when running for president in 2020. So there's going to be a few states that Brett Kavanaugh would not be safe in, and these include Montana, Missouri, Indiana I already didn't fill in, and yeah, I believe those three states Brett Kavanaugh would not win solidly. And this is mostly because, as what I said before, he would lose out on a number of moderate Republicans, and these states have heavy moderate Republican makeup. And when you combine that with the lack of Trump turnout that Kavanaugh would be getting, you can see why these states wouldn't be solidly in his column. However, some states that would be solidly in Biden's column would be Virginia, New Hampshire, means 2 electoral votes. New Mexico, no, there we go, and Colorado. And again, this is because of the fact that whatever moderate Republican base there are in these states, and that's really the main reason why most of these states like New Mexico, Colorado, Virginia, and the Northeast, those moderate Republicans are what makes these states not solid for the Democrats. If it wasn't for those moderate Republicans, and especially if it wasn't for those Trump Republicans, these states would be solidly safe in the Democrats' column 9 times out of 10, and that's what we're seeing now. Brett Kavanaugh would turn off most moderate Republicans. He would really get his main voter base. Kavanaugh would be really the stout conservatives, the Dick Cheney conservatives, the those kind of conservatives, those really devout conservatives who really stick to their values, and especially I think his campaign would be focused mainly around anti-abortionism because that's what his legal career has been mainly characterized by, and that's not a position that the Republican Party has taken a very strong stance on recently because it's just not a very strong political stance in general. And that's another reason why Brett Kavanaugh wouldn't do so well amongst moderate Republicans, especially not around right-leaning independents as well. So that's a big factor in why all these states would go safely in Biden's column. And Biden obviously would have far much more name recognition than Kavanaugh, far much more experience than Kavanaugh, and I think he would be much more well-liked than Kavanaugh just in general in these states where these are already pretty much in the Democrats' column. Some other states that are also going to be safe would be Pennsylvania and Minnesota, which I just want to talk about separately. Pennsylvania would be safe in Biden's column because, as I said before when doing predictions between Biden and whoever else, Biden has very strong ties to Pennsylvania. He has very strong approval in Pennsylvania. Obama did very well in the state, mainly because of Biden. And I think that if he was on the ticket, and if he was running against someone like Brett Kavanaugh, who would lose that Trump base, would lose those moderate Republicans, this state would move solidly into Biden's column. And this isn't just because of Kavanaugh's sex scandal. So I just want to make that clear. It's because of his politics. Like if you nominate someone with the same kind of ultra conservative politics like Brett Kavanaugh, the Republican Party will turn off independents especially, and moderate Republicans as well, and the Democrats will have very strong numbers on their side. That's for the most part why the Republican Party is accepting Trump politics, because it's much more robust and it's much more easy to get voters out with that kind of campaigning strategy. I just want to cover on that. I digress. Sorry, I lost my place. Michigan, I would consider to be likely. Oh, let me just switch the color palette. My apologies. Michigan, I would consider to be likely. I think it's not centered. I think it just ruined the center of the recording, but whatever. Michigan, I consider to be likely in Biden's column. The only reason why I wouldn't consider to be safe in Biden's column is because I think that Brett Kavanaugh could appeal to a number of white working class Republicans, but even then, like, the only reason I'm not calling it safe in Biden's column is because the state is, for the most part, competitive. And I think that even if you lose out on that Trump base, that wouldn't affect Kavanaugh too much, considering the Trump base has diminished greatly here. But still, it'd be pretty likely in Biden's column. Montana, I consider to be likely in Kavanaugh's column. Same with Missouri and same with Indiana. Obviously, these states are solid red in most other predictions, and the only reason why they're not going to be solid red in Kavanaugh's column, as I covered before, is because Kavanaugh would have a difficult time at appealing to moderates, and he would most likely only get solid conservatives, very ultra conservatives. But even then, these states just, for the most part, vote Republican down the ballot. So that'd be a big factor in why they would go to Kavanaugh for the most part. Oh, and two other regions that I forgot to call would be Nebraska's second and that first district, which I think, for the same logic as Montana, Missouri, and Indiana, would go likely, not solid, in Kavanaugh's column. Nevada, I'd call likely in Biden's column. Again, the only reason why it's not solid in Biden's column is because Kavanaugh could appeal to the Republican base in the state, which is pretty strong overall, but he would also lose out on those Trump Republicans. He would also lose out on those... I'm going to call it solidly in Biden's column. As I'm saying it, the logic doesn't really make too much sense. And the reason why it'd be solid in Biden's column is because this state, one, has a strong Democratic identity to begin with, and if Kavanaugh was on the ticket, he would turn off most of the Republican base and cut turnout in half for the most part. So that's why I would recall it solidly and not likely in Biden's column. Wisconsin, I would consider to be likely in Biden's column, making him the hypothetical next president of the United States. And this, for the most part, is because, like I said before, although this state has a very high number of registered Republicans, Kavanaugh would only get a portion of them, the ones who are very strong and have very strong opinions on abortion and who are very just ultra-conservative in general. Kavanaugh would most likely cut Republican turnout in half. A number of moderate Republicans would probably go to Biden or just not turn out at all, making the state go likely in Biden's column. Florida, I would also consider to be likely in Biden's column. This state is very divisive as it is already, but if you nominate someone like Kavanaugh, he would lose out on those Trump Republicans, which make up a significant amount of the registered Republicans in the state. He would lose out a number of moderate Republicans, and that he would be left with the ultra-conservative Republicans, as I've said multiple times throughout this video, making the state go likely in Biden's column. Now moving over to leans, I'd call Maine's second to be leaning in Biden's column. I think the only reason why it's not solidly in his column, or not likely in his column, is because this state is very conservative in general, but I still think that Kavanaugh would lose out in a number of those very conservative Republicans, making it go likely, or leaning in Biden's column, rather. Ohio, same logic, virtually, I'd call leaning in Biden's column. Again, those moderate Republicans would probably still vote for Kavanaugh regardless, and I think that Kavanaugh would probably get Trump's endorsement. Again, I don't know how this scenario would happen. It probably would never happen. Obviously, Kavanaugh isn't going to be running for president, and obviously he isn't going to be challenging Trump. But if he was the nominee, Trump would most likely endorse him. However that would work out, again, I don't know. This is just all hypothetical. But that endorsement would probably make him do moderately okay amongst Trump Republicans. Not as well as Trump himself, obviously. And he'd also lose out on those moderate Republicans, which would make this stake a leaning into Biden's column. Iowa and... I guess I'm filling in Nebraska's first, but it doesn't really matter because they're both the same, or at least I'm going to be calling them the same. Nebraska's second and Iowa would both call leaning in Biden's column, and this is because I think that Biden would have a difficult time, just as any other Democrat would, at appealing to those rural voters, but Kavanaugh would most likely turn them off very much and make them go to Biden's side. A number of moderate Republicans would probably not turn out at all in this scenario, and I'd call Iowa and Nebraska's second, both leaning in Biden's column. Arizona, I call leaning in Biden's column as well, and this really comes down to the fact that the state is dominated by moderate Republicans, and those moderate Republicans, again, as I said multiple times, would either not turn out for the election at all, or would go to Biden, making the state go leaning in Biden's column. North Carolina, virtually the same logic. It would go leaning in Biden's column. Kavanaugh would turn off those moderate Republicans. He would get a moderate amount of Trump base support. And I'm going to restate what I've said before about the Trump base. I think that Kavanaugh would get a significant amount of Trump voters, but not nearly as enough as Trump would get, obviously. And that'd be a big factor as well in why he would do so badly. But North Carolina, I consider to be leaning in Biden's column for those reasons. Georgia, I would consider to be leaning in Kavanaugh's column. Again, this state is trending more and more Democratic, but it still has a heavy Republican identity, and I think that even if Kavanaugh's on the ticket, they're going to pick an ultra-conservative over Joe Biden, a moderate Democrat, which just goes to show you that the state is not ready to go to the Democrats, at least not in my opinion, not yet. And then Texas, which would be very narrow, I'm going to call leaning in Kavanaugh's column. I think that there's a very strong conservative base in this state, and I think that there's also a very strong anti-abortion base in this state, and I think that Kavanaugh would do pretty well amongst those voters. But that's obviously not the reason why he would win this state. I think the reason why he would win this state is just because it's not ready to go to the Democrats for most other candidates. And I think it become close closer than Georgia and probably the closest state in this map, but I don't think it would go to Biden in virtually any scenario. All right, so this is the election prediction. Obviously, this isn't a likely scenario. I just did this because I just wanted to see how someone like Kavanaugh, who is not only a very strong conservative, but is also plagued by a number of scandals. And I meant to cite the scandals more often in this video. My apologies, but in this prediction, I think this is pretty reasonable, considering the scandals, considering Kavanaugh's political positions, and considering his current approval throughout the United States amongst voters. I think this is how the election would go. I would give Biden an 85% chance of winning and Kavanaugh a 15% chance of winning. Alright, so if you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like, share, and subscribe. It's the only way for small channels like mine to grow. And if you guys want to see any video in particular, please leave a comment and I'll put it on my list for the future. And I hope you guys have a good day. See ya.